Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for joining me again here today on Hessens County for another TTRPG Talk. This feeder series takes a look at tabletop role-playing games and related materials, makes suggestions for your own games, and takes a look at some of my own materials. Today, we're going to be taking a look at an SRD for our SRD series by looking at ENI. ENI is a rule system. It doesn't explicitly call itself an SRD, but it's essentially what it is. It is a rule system framework that you are encouraged to use to create your own games. This was originally put up as part of ZineQuest 4 on Kickstarter as by Charles Ward of EX First Games. This SRD, just to give you a basic idea, does contain some basic concepts that are similar to some other ones that we have looked at so far, like Breathless, but it definitely approaches them in a very different way. Another thing that's important for us to note is that if you are to get it on itch today, which a link can be found in the description down below, it is pay what you want. Again, if you pay $5 or more, then you can get a PDF of ENI for easy printing, but you can also find on there a one-pager, which is what we're going to be taking a look at while explaining the rules today, a version of this ENI manual, essentially that's formatted specifically for screens, a PDF version of the character sheet, which is structured in a sort of double-sided pamphlet, double-sided one-sheet pamphlet, and also journaling sheets, which essentially are just like a bunch of lines and columns on a sheet that you can print out kind of like this, with the idea of putting it together so that you can kind of write out story stuff, or if you're using the ENI system for journaling. Because that's another thing I wanted to very quickly note right now that is kind of special about ENI, and that is that ENI is GM agnostic. Basically, or narrator agnostic. This is a system that you can utilize whether you are playing it by yourself or with a group. It is also a system that is compatible for playing with a GM or a game master, a narrator, storyteller, whatever you want to call that individual, a facilitator, right? Or just with a group of players around the table instead of with that. There are lots of ways that you can approach that. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at some of these rules. So, as I mentioned, this system does have some similarities to Breathless, the various versions of Breathless that you can find out there, because it utilizes the full set of dice. And it also contains a system where when you use a die, it is spent. Each character just gets 6 dice. You get, normally, these are structured so that basically you would be getting one of each size. So you get a 20, you get a 12, you get a 10, you get an 8, you get a 6, you get a 4. Just like you can see in the middle column there on the page, right? Those are your dice. Just like in Breathless, when you roll the die, it's used. Unlike in Breathless, in this system, when you roll the die and it's used, it becomes spent. It doesn't like degrade or anything. It's spent until you rest, and then you can get it back. So the next question, I guess, would be, what happens when you roll? Well, when you're using your dice to roll, right, all you need to do to succeed is to get a 4 or better. So obviously, if we were to use that little pyramid D4 and you roll the D4, then obviously there's a very small chance of success. There are, however, a couple of things that are important to note about results. One thing is that you are encouraged that the higher the result you roll, the higher the actual number above 4, then presumably the greater your success would be. So in some ways it might pay off, or the better the outcome, right? In some ways it might pay off to use that D12 or D20 to succeed in something, because you want to very much succeed in something. However, rolling a bigger die also comes with a trade-off. And that is something that is very interesting in this system, in that when you roll your die, If you roll the largest number on your die, this is considered a great success. Great successes actually have special outcomes that you might potentially get. So, for example, if I were to roll my d12 and I roll a 12, then I get a great success. And I can roll on this table that you can see here in this third column, this table at the top of the third column here, basically to gain either a narrative or even a mechanical advantage. So I could recover some spent dice, or I could gain some. We'll discuss exactly what gold and silver ENIs are in a second, but I could gain some points that I can use for certain special things later. It is a 20 option table, but it's not actually a D20 table. It is a roll your spent dice again table. There are two other major elements that might be important to discuss when we're taking a look at challenges, and that is that each character can have points that they can spend to do certain things. These are separated into silver ENIs and gold ENIs. Gold ENIs are basically points. They're essentially a type of story point that allows you to re-roll a die. You roll your D. You're forced to roll your D4. You roll your D4. It doesn't go very well, right? You decide to roll it again, so you spend your die, or you spend your gold ENI point, right? A silver ENI just adds a +1 to a result after you have rolled it. So both of these points are designed to be used after a roll occurs. So they are story modification dice, or story modification points, okay? And you can potentially gain those through different events that happen. So, for example, it's generally encouraged that if you're playing the game with a game master, that this game master or facilitator hands out silver ENIs whenever a character asks a good question or makes a good contribution to events in the story. While gold ENIs appear to only really be accessible if you roll that 11 on the great success table. There might be other ways to gain them, but those are the only ways that are existent, at least here in these mechanics, as described on this page. They also give you, ENI also does contain some basic rules on how to create other characters, which is how Charles Ward describes NPCs. Basically, either the narrator decides, the whole group decides, or you can roll randomly on a table that gives this other character a challenge dice. Basically, in this case, the other character essentially utilizes their die the same way that you would in the Breathless system, where, or at least in a similar way to the Breathless system. When they're rolling the die, it does not degrade. So let's say I get a D10 NPC, right? They're going to be rolling that D10 every time they do an action to see if they succeed or not. However, if they become damaged or affected, then instead they are going to be, that's when their die decays. So my D10, let's say I have a D10 NPC, my player character hits them and injures them, their D10 degrades to a D8. Their D8 then would degrade to a D6 and then to a D4. Once the D4 degrades, that means that this NPC is knocked out. They've been removed from play, essentially. I mentioned just now what happens to non-player characters, other characters, whenever they become injured or become affected by some element inside of the game mechanics. But what if your player becomes affected in the game mechanics? Well, that's how your dice basically kick in as also a form of hit points. So again, we've got 6 dice, right? At least to start, right? Our starting character has 6 dice. Our dice also act as hit points because whenever our character is affected by something, Again, maybe they're injured, maybe they have a significant social or financial setback, maybe they have some major story event occurs to them that would potentially be inflicting damage on them. In order to overcome that effect, to continue acting, right, you essentially spend one of your dice. So if I have my full set of 6 dice, I'm in combat. Let's say I roll a die, that's 1 die spent, right? I get hit, that's a 2nd die spent. I roll again, that's a 3rd die spent. So you can see conflict is very fast and potentially very destructive very quickly. Because basically every time that your character acts, you're spending a die. Every time your character gets hit or injured or has something done to it, you lose a die. So things can stack up very quickly. Unless you're getting those great successes that allow you to recover spent dice or give you extra dice. So just an example of what I was referring to, there's actually an example in the book where you have a character named Bob who is fighting against a robot, who is a D8 other character. Basically, if you take a look at the combat itself, each of these sets, each pair of bubbles going across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Each of those is a round of combat. So we're literally doing 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds of combat. And Bob had to run away in order to avoid dying, or at least becoming severely injured, because Bob was engaging this robot by themselves and was not able to overcome the character, the NPC. 2 things that are important to note that I haven't mentioned so far when it comes to challenges is epic challenges. Sometimes your characters need to do something that's really extreme. You might need to roll 2 dice in order to overcome it. Basically, whenever you're facing an epic challenge, you have to roll 2 dice and both of them have to show a 4 or better. An example might be, okay, let's say Frodo's at the chasm of Mount Doom, and he needs to roll 2 dice and get a 4 or higher on both of his dice in order to throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. And he succeeds with one of them, but the other one fails, and therefore he doesn't overcome the challenge, right? That's just an example. Another thing that can occur that can affect challenges is that you can also have 2 players cooperate together. In this option, each character is rolling 1 die, and then you only need as many successes in order to meet the type of challenge you're trying to overcome. So if this is just a standard challenge, you have 2 characters working together, they both roll a die, only one of them needs to succeed. Let's say we're doing the same thing, but it's an epic challenge. Again, you can have each of the characters contribute 1 die. In this case, both of them would need to succeed because it is an epic challenge, and both of the dice are spent. But at least in this case, each of the characters are only spending 1 instead of both of the characters having to spend, or instead of 1 character having to spend 2 dice, which might not necessarily be an option. So yeah, that's ENI. Again, this is a role-playing framework that was created by Charles Ward of EX First Games. There will be a jam for this. Charles contacted me themselves, so we'll see when that comes out. If it does come out soon, I will update the description in the video down below in order to link to that. But if not, keep an eye out there. I will again put links to ENI by EX First's. I will put a link to ENI on the itch store just so you can see it there. And again, thank you all for joining me again today. Go out there and make some games. And don't forget to rate your itch purchases.
If you would like to show your support for this channel or for the Hessens County blog, in the description down below, you will find links to the channel coffee and also the itch store. Please feel free to take a look, and thank you for your support.